Some of the really interesting stories in the Quran are when, like sometimes you have like origin stories,
Mhm.
the background. So the origin stories that are all also like very interesting, even in maybe entertainment, are the origin stories of the bad guys.
Yeah.
Because, we're used to seeing the origin story of the good guy,
Mhm.
the hero. But when you get the origin story of the villain, right? That's really interesting. And so the Quran gives us some gives us an insight into that.
Yeah.
And probably one of the more interesting origin stories of a great villain, a great enemy of Allah, an evil person from human history is Qarun.
Mm.
In the 20th juz, specifically in Surah Al-Qasas, Surah number 28, towards the end of the surah, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in the passage, it's about a page and a page and a half, Allah tells us the origin story of this great villain from the time of the Prophet Musa alayhi salam. Obviously, when we think of Musa alayhi salam, the great villain is Fir'aun, right? But this is another kind of like later villain, a secondary villain that Allah tells us about. And just to kind of get us started, the very interesting thing right off the bat about this villain and this bad guy and his origin story is he's actually an internal problem, not an external problem, because Allah literally starts off by saying, Inna Qaruna kana min qawmi Musa. He was from the people.
As opposed to Fir'aun.
As opposed to Fir'aun, who was the oppressor.
Yeah.
He was the external enemy.
Yeah.
I know that that's a bad guy, but he was from inside of the community.
Which is interesting because they had the same pathology of their spiritual illness. Right? Fir'aun, of course, was the archetype of arrogance.
Right.
Qarun, from inside the community, right, from the people of Musa, still, right, as a result of the Allah Ta'ala says treasures that He gave him, this fertilization or this sickness that took place in his heart, it grew, was the disease of arrogance.
Yeah.
Right? And
it says, إِنَّمَا أُوتِيتُهُ عَلَىٰ عِلْمٍ عِنْدِي. This is all me. This is me.
Yeah. Same idea. I think that the other thing that's interesting, subhanAllah, is when you start reading the passage, you learn, and Allah Ta'ala, tells us the origin of his position in the community, to also give the impression to the reader that just because Musa a.s. was a prophet doesn't mean that he's not going to have problems from inside his own community, which Shaykh just alluded to, right? Instead of being external, it's internal. What are some of the things that you feel when you read a passage like this, where you learn? I mean, another example is the Fir'aun and then his wife, right? Asya, like the idea that there's someone in your own home. Prophet Lut a.s., his family, right? Ibrahim a.s., his family.
Yes.
You have these challenges that come from the inside. How do we negotiate that? How do we feel about that as believers? And I know a lot of people watching this are going to be thinking about their own familial or social challenges, right? Not necessarily with judgment, of course, that's not for us. But the idea that, man, this is not something that I'm feeling from the Islamophobia, the outside, but this is a anxiety I'm feeling from the inside.
It literally hits closer to home.
Yeah, literally and figuratively. How do we handle that?
Well, the Mufassirun, some of them highlight that Qarun was actually a relative of Musa alayhi salam. Some say that he was a cousin. So that brings him much closer to just being on the inside.
Yeah.
He's very close to Musa alayhi salam.
Yeah, like Ibn Khalatihi.
Ibn Khalatihi,
right?
Yeah.
Ajib.
And
that's wild.
But with Qarun, there was a challenge of jealousy. He had on multiple occasions tried to tarnish the image of Sayyidina Musa alayhi salam. Allah Azza wa Jal gave him the dunya, the material, but it really bothered him that all the respect and love and honor was with Musa alayhi salam.
And this is also one of those diseases that usually comes from proximity. Like you can't really be jealous of someone you don't know.
Yeah.
But the more you get to know and you see the inner workings of their life and how things are, that's when those thoughts start to come. And so this is a unique disease. Because of their closeness, he was able to develop this resentment towards Sayyidina Musa alayhi salam.
They say al-aqarib al-aqarib. The ones that are close to you are the scorpions.
SubhanAllah.
They bite the hardest.
Yeah.
So, Musa alayhi salam, for him, naturally you can imagine there must be compassion, love there, that this is a relative, this is someone close, we're related, we have family. But, when people choose a path in life, what comes after that, for the most part, is a result of their own decisions. And as family, it sucks, it hurts. Seeing the people closest to you, taking a different path, when you know that your own child can learn from you. Nuh alayhi salam's story. Imagine how hard that is for him.
Yeah. Ibrahim alayhi salam's story.
Ibrahim alayhi salam's, his father.
Yeah.
The Qur'an shares that full dialogue because those that are closest, you would assume logically that they would see the message first.
Makes the most, but it's actually one of the rarer stories in life in general.
Oh wow.
That the son or the son or daughter or the mother or father or the husband or it's rare that they're usually on the exact same wavelength with regards to something. I mean, we see it in the community a lot.
Which is kind of the reason why we give so much credit to I mean, that's why we have so much love and respect to phrase it more properly. That's why we have so much love and respect for people like Khadija radiallahu ta'ala. That's what makes her so special.
Mother of legends.
Yeah. She was the one.
Yeah. That's what makes her so special because she was just like, just unshakable and just like never, she had no hesitation.
Yeah. And to clarify, especially we're talking about in the beginning of Wahi, and throughout the difficulty, but in the beginning of Wahi, especially when the Prophet ﷺ comes back, and she didn't hesitate for a second, you know, and somebody of that caliber, there's something to be said about that, right? Because even, I mean, the Prophet ﷺ, even, you know, we look at some of his family, like Hamza radiallahu anh, you know, some people later, much, and some, I mean, even his
Abbas radiallahu ta'ala anhu was much later.
Yeah, much later, toward the end.
Yeah. Abu Talib supported but didn't accept. And Abu Lahab went after him.
Yeah. All family members. Yeah, subhanAllah. But then you look at somebody like Khadija radiallahu anha, you see instant, right? And you see that bond.
Full commitment.
And then the story and the legend came from that, right? When the Prophet ﷺ is sitting after she passed away, radiallahu anha, and he's saying what? It's like, you know, she was who she was. She's indescribable. And it was partially because of why he said, because she supported me when no one else did. Right? When she was the only one. So when you look at the story of Qarun, right, going back to that concept, it's easy for people now to, I think, put themselves in the shoes of this story. One of the challenges, though, and I'll say this here, is that when you read the origin story of evil people, you tend to put yourself in the side of the hero, and you tend to say, yeah, this is exactly like my crazy aunt, or this is exactly like my uncle, or this and that. But I think it's important, the Qur'an, we talked about this before in a previous episode, it's important for us to think about the Qur'an as being the prescription for us, not for other people. Because we could easily, you know, sit and but the reality is there's no benefit in that. You know, one of my earlier teachers, he used to say to us, when you read the Qur'an and you don't change, but you think of everyone else who needs to change, the Qur'an actually hasn't benefited you. You haven't allowed it to benefit you. And so the best thing for someone to do is for someone to say, you know what, how am I actually being Qarunic in my life? Like, which family members do I show a little bit of resentment towards, or which people, which blessings of Allah do I receive that I allow me to think I'm more special than somebody else because of that? Which is a very common thing that we struggle with. So
and for me, that's why like the part of the passage that really kind of sticks out at me, the whole passage is amazing, but the part that really sticks out to me, even though a lot of times people talk about latanu bil usbati ulil quwwa, right, like how huge his treasures were, but the part of the passage that's really stuck with me, it's a phrase that always comes to my mind first, is innama utituhu ala ilmin indi. Because again, of that like self-reflection, that because I mean, I feel like I get caught in that trap, and probably a lot of people get caught in that trap where it's like, if I'm doing something well, or something's going well with me, or there's a particular achievement and accomplishment, it's so easy for me to go to the place of like, well, yeah, of course, because I'm smart. Like, why does that surprise you? Of course I was good because I'm a smart guy. Or because I worked hard.
And what's the
Why are you shocked?
What's the prescription? What's the resolution for that? Allah Ta'ala says it later in the ayah. He continues, says, don't you realize that there are people who came before you who are much greater than you, much more wealthy than you, much more, you know, you name the variable, than you, right? And they were not successful, right? And so the reality is, like, you think this has to do with you. It's nothing. This is a test that Allah Ta'ala gives to whoever He wills.
That's right.
And that's the realization you have to have. You know, when you think about, for example, your own life, and you're driving and you feel to yourself, man, I really am
something.
Yeah, I'm special, you know.
I'm the deal.
As the kids say, I'm him, you know.
I'm him.
But the reality is that you look and there's the person in the car next to you at the stoplight may actually have much more than you in terms of every accolade.
Actually, there's also an update. I'm built different.
Built different or built very much the same. You come to the realization that you're built, as Shaykh came up with, very much the same.
It's also one of the students I say, you're built very much the same.
The idea is, I think, like a little bit of serving yourself that humble pie, you know, and remembering. and being able to recognize actually the greatness in people around you.
Yeah. I was also going to say, like, another thing of it is, and again, it's going to be another sports reference because that's my poison, but there was a famous old commercial of the actual GOAT, right? Not the GOAT of these kids these days, LeBron James. No, it was a Michael Jordan commercial. Allahu Akbar.
Yeah.
So it's a way to your heart, right? So, but there was an old commercial about him from the 90s, I remember, where he talks about all of his failures.
Mm-hmm.
I missed this many shots. I lost this many games. I've missed this many game winners. And he lists all of his failures, and then he says, and that is why I succeed.
The best is in that commercial in the beginning, he goes, maybe it's my fault.
Yeah.
Because he's trying to basically say, like, maybe I made you think this was easy.
Yeah.
Right? And so it's subhanAllah being...
But it just kind of reminded me, it's a silly reference, but just as a kid, it kind of captured the essence of like what you were talking about. So if I have a few W's in a row, and I start to kind of get into that headspace of like, yeah, I'm awesome. Of course I'm winning.
Yeah.
As you said, that's a beautiful reflection. Like, let me reflect on, the awesomeness of other people around me. But I'm also thinking to myself, what helps me is I actually stop and then think back to a time where I got a major L.
Yeah.
And I reflect on the times that I had successive L's.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm kind of like, well, what happened then? If
Yeah.
I'm so awesome, how come I had all these losses?
Yeah. And then the other thing the Qur'an mentions in this passage is not to be obsessive over other people's privileges, but to rather be grateful for your own. In ayah number 79, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He says, قَالَ الَّذِينَ يُرِيدُونَ الْحَيَاةَ الدُّنْيَا يَا لَيْتَ لَنَا مِثْلَ مَا أُوتِيَ قَارُونَ. Like, if only we had been given what he was given. Showing that sort of like, in English they say they have that sort of like that, they're pining after something.
Coveting.
Coveting, you're pining after it. And it's very interesting because that element of the disease actually has nothing to do with Qarun.
Yes.
That's something that can be present in everybody. And the person or the object of that desire may not even be aware that they're causing that in other people. My mother, subhanAllah, my mom, moms and dads, they all have a lot of wisdom, subhanAllah, just from life. And my mom, growing up, always told us, never test people's ability to be patient with their hasad. Don't put people in a position where you have to trust them. Because you might actually end up causing them with your flamboyance or your boasting, flaunting. You might cause them to fail.
Yeah.
And she's like, and you could have just been smarter for yourself instead of inviting the jealousy, inviting all of that. And again, this is not paranoia.
Yeah.
But my mom was saying, just be smart. If there's no need for you to go out and show and walk and pridefully, right? You don't have to do that. You don't have to do that.
Low-key.
She used to say, be low-key. She used to actually say, never be the best dressed person at a wedding.
Wow.
She said, be the second best. And she used to quote the athar of Umar, when Umar radiallahu anh saw a cute baby. And what did he do? He took a small, little, I don't want to say dirt, but just a little, something, and just made a small mark on the face. And she used to say this and say this was, again, his wisdom to say, you know what? Let people see that this is not a perfect child.
Yeah.
Because people, they come up with crazy stories as to why your life is so good.
The one of the points of reflection Imam Razi mentions in Surah Yusuf, لا تدخلوا من باب واحد وادخلوا من أبواب متفرقة, was also just don't draw that much attention to yourselves.
Yeah, exactly.
Like 8 big dudes who all look similar, they look like family, all marching through one gate.
And if they're related
together.
to Sayyidina Yusuf, they're probably good looking.
Yeah.
Right? Like, you know what I mean? They're probably all attractive.
They're
strong.
sons of prophets.
And big families back then. وَنَحْنُ عُصْبَةٌ, like they actually use that as a way to talk about how they were. And we are a tribe, a clan. So exactly, that's a beautiful point. And now with social media, it's even more problematic.
It's a big issue.
It's even more of an issue. Decide what you're going to share, what you're not going to share, because people, and this story says this, people have the tendency to look at somebody, and no matter what that person's state is with Allah, they're going to look at them and say, I wish I had what they had.
One thing is like being tested by Allah with your own challenges, and the other is becoming a fitna for someone else. Oh Allah, don't make us a fitna for someone else, that I bring hurt or pain in someone else's life. I bring jealousy to them. I make them feel small. I make them feel like they're nothing. I make them ungrateful. I make them...
لا تجعلنا فتنة للذين كفروا.
Yeah. That's the ayah that came to my mind as well. Like, don't make us a fitna for another person. With Qarun, he starts off as a righteous person.
Yeah.
But it just gets to his mind. And it's also worrisome to us. We're in Ramadan, we ask Allah to protect us and keep us on iman. That other dua, رَبَّنَا لَا تُزِغْ قُلُوبَنَا بَعْدَ إِذْ هَدَيْتَنَا. Oh Allah, don't misguide us after guiding us.
Yeah.
Some Mufassirun narrate these riwayat and they're from Israeliyat. They're not necessarily from Bukhari or Muslim.
Mm-hmm.
But nonetheless, they give us some indication of what the potential possible background of the story was.
Yeah.
They also say Qarun was a person of knowledge.
Mm.
That's why he says, ilmin indi. I'm a smart guy, well-read, educated.
He was an educated, scholarly person, and he's flaunting his wealth. You
Yes.
should know better than that.
Yeah.
These people just migrated.
To whom much is given, much is expected, right?
And also like Qarun's story really, I think it's kind of a very humbling, sobering. I think sobering is the right word. It's a sobering reminder for me, for a lot of us today, that, salvation is in our relationship with Allah. But a lot of times what we do is we kind of it's like a crutch. We use something as a crutch for salvation, but it's not salvation.
Yes.
We delude ourselves into thinking this thing will lead to salvation.
It feels better.
Yeah. So like Qarun being related to Musa alayhi salam, of course, he's related to Musa alayhi salam. That's no guarantee, as we talked about before. Qarun being very wealthy, and maybe probably also doing like a lot of good social work in the community is a good thing, but it almost became his crutch. And so that makes me kind of think about a lot of times where it's like, I might be associated with someone, I might be around certain people, I might be involved in a couple of things, but that doesn't guarantee my success, my salvation.
I've always thought, to this point, Shaykh, beautifully, I've always thought how amazing it is that Ramadan is the month of simple ibadah.
Yeah.
Like,
Is it simpler?
simple. Like, meaning not foundational ibadah, how about that? Meaning no one is disqualified and nobody is instantly removed from the capacity of doing what Ramadan asks. You know what I mean? Obviously you have people with medical issues and whatnot, but generally speaking, and it's so interesting to me as a sign of what? As a sign of you might find somebody that has very little in terms of knowledge or very little in terms of other things, complex Islamic goals, but they might just be somebody who reads an ayah of Qur'an or a page of Qur'an every day, stuttering through it, right? As many of us are doing this month, right? Struggling to find time, or even when we find time, maybe, or someone that hasn't practiced it. And then you have people that are praying their 5 prayers, maybe they're struggling to make it on time certain days. But subhanAllah, because of their sincerity, they're given that success. But then you have people that are deluded into, like Shaykh said, the crutch of their spirituality, but they actually end up sabotaging themselves later because they became what? They became arrogant as a result of it.
Yeah, and that's why, like, of course, obviously, we're all involved in, like, institutional work, educational work, community work. We want to encourage people. We don't want to discourage people from coming and volunteering and being involved. But that's why in our conversations with community members, with volunteers, with team members, we also do talk about that we really, really appreciate you being here. But this doesn't excuse you from the prayer.
No.
Yes.
In fact, last year what we did was we actually hired people who are not Muslim. We paid them to come and help clean up, because one of the great pitfalls of a volunteer in Ramadan is that they miss the prayer. And they think that they're doing something good, and may Allah reward everybody, but the reality is there's nothing better at that moment that you could be doing than praying your Isha and Jama'ah and then praying your Tarawih prayer. And we can spend a little bit of money to make sure that somebody who doesn't have that obligation yet, that they're going to be, inshallah, in a position where they can help you so you can perform it. I just wanted to wrap up this conversation. I know it's going quite long, but we talked about the people that sort of became deluded because of what they saw. And then, of course, the punishment comes to him and he's swallowed up by the earth. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says is actually a famous punishment for people that do rebel against Allah as a result of their arrogance. It's almost like the most humiliating way. Yeah, it's almost like the most humiliating way to go. And then the Qur'an actually says that those people who craved his position, tamannaw makanahu, that they wanted his position, at that point they said, yeah, I get it now. I get it. Right? That was not what I should be desiring and seeking. And Allah Ta'ala is the one who gives his rizq to whoever he wills. Sometimes there's no shame that when you find yourself, coveting something that you shouldn't be coveting, when you see the result of that, when you see the negative impact of that, there's no shame in admitting it. And there's no shame in saying, you know what, I do have to snap out of it. Ramadan is the month where you snap out of a lot of things. A lot. It's like the month where you admit, hey, 11 months of the year, I was spending my time, my wealth, my whatever in the wrong way. Until we have that humility, until we're able to admit that, we're not going to find the same realization that these people found.
Absolutely.
Yes.
So may Allah Ta'ala accept from us, inshallah.
Ameen, ameen,
May Allah Ta'ala
ameen.
give us the ability to always have good perspectives
Ameen, ameen.
and protect us from having the arrogance of some of these people
Ameen.
and give us the humility of the righteous people.
Ameen.
Ameen, ya Rabb.